This podcast is sponsored by our good friends who have become patrons via the Patreon crowdfunding site. If you'd like to join them, helping us produce more podcasts, films and other shows, please go to patreon.com/The Prehistory Guys to find out more. Hello, I'm Michael Bott.
And I'm Rupert Soskin.
And wow, welcome to this Prehistory Guys podcast. Will be interesting, not that they aren't all interesting, from the point of view that something that on the surface seemed simple will take us all over the place, from pronunciation of Gaelic words to...
No, that's all over to you.
to finding out what happened when on Lewis with the investigation we're following up, to wherever. Anyway, it'll be all over the place. It may even take us to Wisconsin, but you'll find out more about that later. So, Rupert, what kicked us off into choosing this particular subject?
Well, it's one of those really curious things that there was a wonderful headline. It came out in December of 2019, I think it was, that there was that wonderful flurry of journal articles saying that lightning strike inspired the building of Callanish on Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. And it's a bit like, well, it's not the same, but it made me think of sailors built Stonehenge. It's like, well, really, was it a lightning strike that made them build it? Well, and you start looking into everything, and maybe.
Well, absolutely. It has been our experience that investigating these spurious headlines has actually been quite a rich seam of material for us. So in that vein, we started looking about. So, yes, the hypothesis, what we will have taken away, or if you've seen any of the headlines, the hypothesis you will have taken away is that once upon a time, a lightning strike at Callanish on the island of Lewis would have inspired the building of the monuments we see today. So, it's not quite like that, is it?
No, it really, really isn't. I mean, okay, in fairness, you could say, well, it could have been.
Yes.
But that's as far as you can go. The likelihood is, I mean, I was thinking of all sorts of possible scenarios for this, trying to conjure up, what might have happened. And one of the things that really struck me, bearing in mind that the actual magnetometry surveys, they did show that there was at least one significant strike, possibly a number of strikes in the same place over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
That in itself is interesting, isn't it? Why would there be multiple strikes in the same place? Before
we get into that detail, though, I mean, the fact is that the newspaper headlines, the mainstream media articles, they're all based on this one paper that was published in December of 2019. Which was undertaken under the auspice of what's called the Calanais Virtual Reconstruction Project, which is a project out of the University of St Andrews in conjunction with the University of Bradford. And the main drivers, I think the lead author of the paper was C. Richard Bates. He's of St Andrews University. Martin Bates from University of Wales, Trinity St David. Where's that?
Well, apart from St David's.
Yeah. Yes, I don't know where
that's
that
Pembrokeshire, isn't it?
I think you're right. Dr. Christopher Gaffney, head of School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences, and Vincent Gaffney, and they are brothers, of the School of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences, University of Bradford. So, and the thing is, point number one, we don't know when this survey was undertaken.
No, we don't. We missed out Timothy Raub. Raub?
Oh, I beg his pardon. His pardon.
I'm not sure where he's from.
Okay.
Actually, but no, that's the curious thing, isn't it? That we can't find any date for the actual.
Yeah.
For the most recent research.
So we'll have to assume, for argument's sake, that it was undertaken quite recently, and that the paper was published hard upon the tails of the data being in, as it were.
Yes, although I mean, I think that's probably fair, but it should also be stated that a lot of this paper has referenced some old research and excavations going back to the 1970s and 80s, and because we can't find any other dates whatsoever, it does make you wonder quite how much of this has just been a re-evaluation of the old data.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, because it was funded directly for the purposes of evaluating the effectiveness of the kinds of techniques that they were using. So I don't think they'd have got funding for regurgitating old stuff. They had to take the actual machinery out into the field and do the stuff.
That is a very good point, which makes it even more curious as to why there is no dating for any of that we can find.
I'm sure somebody can illuminate us on this.
I hope they can, because it's not like we haven't looked.
No, exactly. Not that it's hugely important. We don't want to get too hung up on it. But it's interesting that out of this particular bit of research that this information comes up, or these kind of headlines come up, because I think the purposes of the original survey were actually quite dry. The purposes were to evaluate the effectiveness of the techniques they were going to employ, more than doing an investigation of Callanish or one of the sites around Callanish. They only chose the site they did because they thought it was a good example to test the usefulness of the magnetometry in getting down through the peat to look at what's below, with a view to using that technique on other sites elsewhere. So it wasn't an investigation of the Callanish sites per se, because a large part of the investigation was also bathymetry out in the lochs and the inlets to find out how sonar surveys could reveal information, not necessarily, prehistoric information, but geological information and information about landslips and land movements in the past.
Yes. They were actually good enough as well to give a list of all the machinery, I'm sure that's the wrong word, all the equipment that they used during the geophys survey.
Yeah, some sexy sounding stuff, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. If any of the nerds amongst us,
let's not go there. Let's not.
No, I know. But it's just when you read about the GF instruments, blah blah blah, Mini Explorer, you think, oh,
yeah.
Yes, they certainly did the number. I just do not understand why they haven't put any dates for this survey work. It's very strange.
So anyway, I think that's enough sort of background. As far as the site itself is concerned, I didn't know this quite so much, actually. I mean, we know Callanish pretty well, but we just know the main site, and that's what most people know about. If not having visited, then at least having seen pictures. It's the most photogenic site. Well, it must be one of the most photogenic megalithic sites anywhere.
It's truly, in fact, I think, didn't I say it at the time? It truly is a thing of wonder.
Yes.
It's just breathtaking. Everything about it is breathtaking. I do remember, and it just shows how unaware we were about certain peripherals, but I do remember at the time we were looking in the landscape nearby for two other sites that we knew were there.
Okay.
And we couldn't see them.
Your memory is serving you better than mine is to carry on.
Well, yeah, that was it. We knew they were there because they were marked on the map, but we couldn't see them at all. I think we did see something that was entirely unimpressive that was reasonably close by.
We didn't go up to the site or try to find the site in question that we're going to be talking about here, did we? No, because that's in the opposite direction. No. All right.
It's actually, you saying that, it's prompted another thought that the implication from all the journal articles is that this happened at the Callanish circle.
Yes.
And that's just entirely wrong.
Yeah. Not everyone. If you read the text, not every single one, but I would say at least 50% you come away with the impression that the main Callanish site that we all know from the beautiful pictures was inspired by a lightning strike in the ground in the middle of the circle there. That is incorrect.
Indeed. Because it is one of the 15 sites that are, in fact, is it more than 15 that are known to exist around the main Callanish site itself?
Yeah.
It's a very complex little settlement there, set up, site, collection of, most of them under the peat. There's just virtually nothing to see on the landscape for most of them, is there?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the point. Callanish itself, we wouldn't know too much about unless the excavations had been done in the peat, because it was largely covered up. And the same pertains for the other standing stones and stone circles in the environment. That there are millennia of deposits of peat built up that's covering the base rock in the landscape.
Yes, interesting that if you read the geo archaeology, that the site itself, they reckon post-glacial was all forested.
Yeah,
up there.
Yeah.
No, I find that's quite interesting. When you
fantastic. Yeah.
And the peat had already started to cover the landscape and take it over by just under 6,000 years ago. So, what was the landscape that they were building the sites? What form did it take? Clearly the forest was already being cleared if it wasn't clear, because the peat had already started taking over.
I think there may be a clue in the fact that the site that we're going to be talking about, the site that revealed this lightning strike, that site does have a view to all the other sites in the Callanish complex, in the Tursachan complex. Yeah, so that suggests maybe that the land was open at the time that the building took place.
Yes. Yeah. You just said Tursachan complex. I think you probably ought to explain that.
Tursachan. I had not heard it before. Again,
I hadn't.
The Gaelic word.
We had to go and look it up.
Yeah, which is used as a substitute for the Callanish site Tursachan. It's what does it mean? Large stones.
It means standing stones.
Standing stones or big stones.
I got the meaning of standing stones. You got large stones. I think it just shows that it's an interpretation.
Tursa, I think, is stones, is big stones. Mm-hmm. And Khan is the plural. Tursachan. That's what I've taken away. So there we go. That's one of the little digressions that aren't you so glad you tuned in, listeners, to this edition of the Prehistory Guys. Keep listening, there's more to come. Yeah.
Yes.
Or not. So anyway, the Callanish Virtual Reconstruction Project chose this particular site, and I'm going to leap straight in here, and this is where this is where the wheels are going to come off. I was very good with Tursachan there, but this is where the wheels are going to come off. Airigh na Beinne Bige, or it could be Airigh na Beinne Bige, depending on
I'm leaving this to you.
Exactly. Which Shall we refer to it as we go on as Callanish Site 11? That would be.
I think that's probably wise.
Which is, I think, the easier way of talking about the site. But the interesting thing is the Calanais Virtual Reconstruction Project chose this site because there was a single standing stone there, but it was said that was the one remaining stone of a pre-existing circle, which either has been destroyed, taken away, fallen down, but the evidence for it being a circle would be under the peat, so this is the perfect site to check out whether the stuff works, whether the magnetometry works in figuring out if for surveying rock underneath peat, basically. And if you can get meaningful results about Neolithic and megalithic sites.
And they did.
And they did. So quite, I mean, if they'd only found the 13 other pits, which they seem to have done, which suggests, yes, there was a pre-existing circle there, but actually, if you look at the pictures, it looks a bit more complex to me. It doesn't look like a plain old circle. It looks more something like a sort of progenitor of Callanish itself, because there are sort of interesting outliers amongst the 13 stones that make it look more like a complex rather than just a plain old circle.
Yes, it does make you wonder. I mean, for those of you that aren't familiar with the layout of Callanish, that it's actually alignments, and I mean, there's a main avenue that goes to a circle, and there are various alignments throughout the site that give you different angles. I mean, it's supposed to be all astronomically relevant to things that we're still only figuring out today. But this, the reconstruction, the virtual reconstruction, does seem to show that there are other alignments and rows as part of this circle, don't there? It's certainly, as you say, it's not at all a simple structure, which does make you wonder what they were figuring out.
Yeah. Oh, and just something I didn't mention before, and that is this site, Site 11, is 2 kilometres north of the main site.
2.5, isn't it?
2.5, okay.
I think it's 2.5.
Yeah. But what caused all the furore is not the confirmation of more of a complex of stones surrounding this single stone, but of the anomaly at the centre of this circle, the sort of star-shaped splodge that came out from the data, and the interpretation of that kind of star-shaped splodge seems to be that it's indicative of a lightning strike.
Yes, it's you see, it makes me wonder if they actually excavated this, because it has always been a fantasy of mine to
do we want to go there? Lightning. Are you sure you want to go there?
To see lightning hit the ground so that you can actually go and dig it up and hope that you get a fullerite. A fullerite is where the heat has fused the substrate into whatever. Sometimes, if it's particularly if it's a sort of sandy soil, then you can get all sorts of glassy, wonderful things buried in the ground from the lightning strike. And so I looked at this, and that was the first thing that crossed my mind was, I wonder if anybody's dug that up. But you'd think that. The implication, the people saying that, the lightning strike inspired the building of the site. Well, you think, if somebody did back then, if 5,000 years ago, what was the date of the
Well, they reckon from the peat, it must be at least 3000 BC, something like that. Or am I talking about the building of Callanish itself? Which is
but I think it's there or thereabouts. Isn't it? So for the sake of argument, 5,000 years old-ish. So if somebody had seen lightning hit the ground at a given spot, then you can imagine somebody thinking that was the gods showing you, build it here, build it and they will come.
Yes. But that's not where Callanish is built. That is not, this is
no, but it's another circle.
It's another circle. And then again, that begs the question. The whole point of this is that, that is the exciting thing, that somebody built something because that's where lightning struck. And yet there are 15, 16 other sites in the immediate vicinity. What inspired the building of those then?
Exactly. I personally think it's a nonsense. And the thing I think is more likely, although considerably less romantic, is just imagine that. So you had woodland, probably not dense woodland. It was just, and then one day a tree got struck by lightning.
Yes.
And so for years people would say, because, if you're meeting people across kilometers of landscape and you say, I'll meet you by the dead tree, or I'll meet you by the burnt tree.
Oh.
And so that becomes a meeting place just because it's the standout tree in the whole region. So I'll meet you there. And then because that becomes over time a meeting place that everybody knows, that's why they put the circle there.
There you go. There's the story, Mr. Soskin. I think
that's the one.
I think that's a good one. I mean, we like the idea. Don't get us wrong. We like the idea of a lightning strike inspiring the building of a megalithic, major megalithic site. But to us, it's a bit of a stretch. I think. I mean, the other reason it's a bit of a stretch is that you have to have seen it happen. And it's not all that likely that, you're most likely to have seen it happen. How many people are likely to have seen it happen and agreed at the same time that was the spot that occurred?
Yeah.
And you've got all the other variables, like, did this lightning strike occur at night? Was it likely that you'd be able to locate where the lightning had struck? Do you know what I mean?
In the pouring rain?
In the pouring rain. And who would have been out anyway?
Exactly.
So you've got to take these sort of actual human realities into consideration at the same time. It's nice idea, and it may be true, but it just strikes me as unlikely.
If it was already peaty, then I must admit, this is well outside my knowledge, but peat. It is, you can burn peat. We use it to make fires. So a lightning strike on peat, you would think would have been quite clear to see after the event.
Okay.
I would imagine.
Okay.
Maybe it was still smouldering, and people found smouldering spot and thought, there was something romantic about that. I don't know.
Fair enough. I still can't get over the idea, well, why is the major site of Callanish a mile and a half south of there?
Well, again, do you not think if we factor in, because it's another instance of us compressing history into manageable boxes, that if these sites were built or constructed, I mean, even if it was a century apart, which would seem reasonable if there's 15 of them all within spitting distance of each other, that if they were a century apart, then the fact that they put one up where lightning may have been the instigator, that could have, whilst it wouldn't have been necessarily forgotten, it well, then we get into what were the circles for anyway, when there's so many of them close together. You can't say it's another temple when there's 15 of them all within, a stone's throw.
But interestingly, without, before we chuck out the thing entirely, there are other sites in the world which have been associated with the lightning strike, prehistoric sites that have been associated with the lightning strikes.
What have you conjured up? What have you conjured up there?
No, I'm thinking about the ones in Wisconsin to do with the mounds there.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Which no, I didn't conjure it up. I mean, they did mention it. To be fair, in the original paper, Bates, Gaffney and Gaffney. Oh, chaff. Bates, Gaffney and Gaffney. Yes.
So you've got one in Wisconsin, because I've got one in Dakota.
Oh, which one is Buffalo Slough or Slough or Slough?
Buffalo Slough or Slough or whatever is that's in Dakota.
Oh, really? Oh, there must be more than one Buffalo Slough.
Slough.
If you're wondering why we're saying Slough, it's because it's American. We'd pronounce it Slough. Slough is what a snake does with getting rid of its skin, and I think the Americans also pronounce it Slough. Don't know.
Buffalo Slough.
Yeah, sounds more like a proper place name than Buffalo Slough, doesn't it? Buffalo Slough sounds more. Anyway, we digress slightly, as I promised we would do. But there have been investigations, inconclusive, that associate lightning strikes with some of the mounds, early American mounds there. Shall we get to bring it back home now? Because there's obviously much, much more we need to investigate. And here's the interesting thing, of course, this whole complex being on the Isle of Lewis, up there in the Hebrides, there's not that much real investigation gone on. If you compare, of course, places like Avebury and Stonehenge, considering that it is such an important site. I suppose it's the remoteness and locality and the costs involved in that which mean it hasn't been quite as well investigated as you might think it has been. To be fair, I think some of the most interesting investigations have been were done by Margaret Curtis, or Margaret Ponting as she was, and Gerald Ponting. But she actually lives there, so it's sort of in her blood, as it were. But it's stuff that we would love to find out, and we haven't really done that much investigation of Callanish, its site itself. Apart from the stuff we've looked at for this, and I think we'd love to go back up there and do something proper. Try and really pull it together, because I don't think many people have pulled it together and synthesized it in a way that's digestible, in the way that we perhaps could if we made a film one day.
We really should actually, because it is. For me anyway, I think it's the most extraordinary site in the whole of the British Isles. I can't think of anything that really compares. But, I mean, they were talking, when I say they, I think I'm talking about the Pontings really, but they were talking about figuring out the alignments throughout the Callanish main site. When you look at the way the angles have been cut into various stones, so that you can put yourself in a position relative to the rest of the site, and you can see through. So you look past this cut towards another cut in a stone that's the other side. So you're creating a hole, if you like. You're making a sighting line through two separate stones, if that makes any kind of sense. and they were trying to figure out what all these things aligned with, astronomically speaking. You certainly can't avoid the fact that this was all done very carefully and very deliberately. What it was actually done for is bordering on impossible to say.
Which kind of begs the question, when you have got so many sites in such a small space, you think, well, was there an all-encompassing purpose to them, rather than them individually being gathering points or what have you, given that the purpose of Callanish, the main site, is so strong? Was there sort of something going on in the peripheries as well that meant that the individual sites around have some kind of significance that's related to that? I mean, go there now, and it is a very, very open landscape, with views across the lochs to the sea, out to Loch Rogue and beyond, and to the sea. So it's ideal for observing the skies or what's happening in the skies, and also the fact that the revelation of the magnetometry revelation of where the other stones may have been, it turns out to be slightly more complex, and as I was saying earlier, than merely a stone circle. It seems to have been a bit more complex than that. Maybe it was just a jumble, who knows? But if there are subtleties in Callanish itself, maybe there were subtleties in this little circle. Who knows? Will we ever be able to find out? Yeah.
But it's also worth pointing out that latitude-wise, it's only a little bit north of Aberdeenshire. So the fact that, because at Callanish itself, we know that the main function of it, as far as we can tell, is the lunar cycle. So you actually get the moon skirting the hillsides at the peak of its 18.6-year cycle. So the fact that there could have been any number of sites that were for slightly different observational practices, it's
tantalising.
It is tantalising. It is. Good word.
As is so much in this area that we have chosen to investigate as being the Prehistory Guys, damn it.
I don't know no more.
So the thing is, how soon can we get back up there?
Well, it would be lovely to be able to schedule another
I tell you
session,
what,
wouldn't it?
Well, we did sort of commit in our heads, at least. I don't know how much we put it up there, that we put the idea out there that when we hit 100 Patreon supporters, then we'd commit to making a film about Callanish and getting up there and doing something proper. We did, yeah. So look, there is a site near Callanish, 2.5 kilometres away, that had 13 stones in it. Now, and there was a lightning strike there at some point. Yes. Did the lightning strike occur first, or did the lightning strike occur after the stone circle went up there? Yeah. Will we ever know any more than that? And how many stories can we make up around that?
Yeah.
There, job done, I think, Mr. Soskin.
I think you're right, Mr. B.
We've said our bit.
Yes.
Well, I think that's time to say goodbye, don't you?
I think it probably is. Just, I think I would recommend, if you're not familiar with the site, do just Google it and have a look at how breathtaking it is up there. I'm obviously talking about the main Callanish site, not Callanish number 11, because there is as yet pretty much nothing to see, is there, other than the fact that they know that the rest of the stones are there under the peat.
Oh, and if you want to be guaranteed wonderful images of the site, please do a Google search for Callanish Digital Designs. Who,
yes.
That is run by a lady called Emma Rennie, who is a photographer who happens to live virtually within sight of the stones itself.
Yes,
and she's a good friend of ours here.
She's very lucky, and she's a fantastic photographer as well. Her work is quite stunning.
Yeah.
So yes, do that thing. Have a look.
And with that, we will say thank you for listening. If you feel inclined to support us do further work, bridging the gap between yourselves and the stuff that archaeologists say, have a look at patreon.com/the Prehistory Guys and see if you can think about helping us out. Making a monthly donation, as little as $1 a month, helps us do the work.
It helps us a lot, yes.
With that, we will say goodbye till the next time.
Cheerio, folks.
Cheerio. Bye-bye. Hello, Michael Bott here. Thank you for watching this Prehistory Guys show. There's loads more to watch, and you can get to some of it on this playlist here. If you'd like to receive updates about when we publish new content, hit the subscribe button. And you can unlock even more content by becoming a Patreon supporter. Hit this button here to find out more about that. See you soon.